Today, we're going to talk about political violence. Let me first offer a disclaimer. Political violence is not an area of particular expertise for me, but it seems to me that a number of important things can be said just by thinking about political violence, the term itself. One understanding of politics is that politics is the settlement of disagreements by means other than violence. When warfare, revolution, riots, or political assassinations break out, that is evidence that politics has failed to resolve the situation, and that political actors have chosen to try another way. In effect, they have renounced politics for another way of pursuing their interests. Other people understand violence as inherent in politics. They might follow Austrian General Karl von Clausewitz's dictum, "War is a continuation of politics by other means." On this view, there is simply a continuum of coercion from its mildest forms, like blackmail, where no violence at all is threatened, just the release of information, up to total war, where all the resources of a territory are employed towards the systematic exercise of violence. Whereas the former view sees politics as fundamentally opposed to violence, this view sees politics as inherently violent. After all, what is violence? Is threatening someone violence if no one is physically hurt? If you rob a bank at gunpoint, have you done anyone violence as long as you haven't shot anyone? If so, then all laws are violence, since all of these laws threaten people. And so the distinction between politics and violence starts to collapse. We can say that when threats are carried out, that violence has become explicit rather than implicit, but to many it seems odd to say that a threat in itself is not an assault. If that were true, then the person trying to stop a robbery would be the cause of the outbreak of violence when the shooting starts. And maybe that's right. It's always possible to distinguish causal responsibility, which is what caused what, and moral responsibility, who is to blame for what. The armed guard who resisted the bank robbery caused the violence by resisting the threats, but that doesn't mean we have to blame the guard for the violence. True, the violence would not have occurred absent the resistance, but it would not have occurred absent many other things, like the invention of firearms, or the perfection of banking systems, the robber's mother meeting the robber's father, or the invention of paper money. And we're usually not going to blame all those people for the actions of individuals, at least those freely chosen. So this brings us to an important point about possible explanations for political violence, if indeed we are only studying breakouts of physical violence, rather than the ever-implicit threats the law and politics and police officers and the whole machinery of the state brings with it. Just because you've identified institutions, individuals, or ideas that cause violence, that is to say, without which the violence would not have arisen, does not mean that you have yet found out who is to blame. That will depend on really complex moral judgments about when and how it's morally acceptable to threaten, to resist threats, and more generally, moral judgments about the overall value of institutions and ideas. Leaving political philosophy aside for a moment, we are still left with a number of competing sources of explanation for political violence. One way to sort them out is to think in terms of proximate and ultimate causes. A proximate cause is the reason violence broke out at a particular time and place, and in the manner that it did. An ultimate cause is the general reason violence breaks out, on average, in all times and places. So we have this distinction here between proximate causes and ultimate causes. And that means that maybe we have two projects here when we're trying to explain political violence. One is a project for a qualitative case study analysis, and the other is for a quantitative cross-national investigation. One is going to give us general knowledge of political violence, but not a lot of insight into particular cases. That is to say, we'll know a lot about what causes violence in general, political violence that is, but not a lot about what caused, let's say, the Russian Revolution in 1918. The other method will give us a lot of information about particular cases, but not tell us a lot about violence in general, or whether our particular case is typical or exceptional. As always, thanks for listening, and if you want to watch more videos, check out my YouTube channel.